The stadium was loud, families waving signs and snapping photos, and I was standing there in the same cap and gown as my sister. From the bleachers, we probably looked perfect. Two daughters graduating together, proud parents in the stands. That picture was a lie. My father paid every cent of Valentina's tuition, housing, books, even her weekends away. He paid nothing for mine. He said she had earned it and I had not. I was told I would manage on my own. People love that word, manage. It sounds like confidence, but it really means survive quietly so no one else has to feel uncomfortable. That was my assignment in our family. Valentina was the celebration. I was the proof that hard work builds character. Crossing that stage wasn't just a diploma. It was walking past years of being treated like a backup plan. I worked mornings and nights to stay enrolled. I filled out forms alone, chased deadlines alone, carried exhaustion like another class on my schedule. I kept my jaw steady when relatives praised my father for being such a dedicated provider, because correcting them would have sounded petty. Silence was easier than sounding bitter. But silence doesn't last forever. Graduation, to him, was supposed to be a photo. For me, it was the bill coming due. My name was about to be read with the truth attached to it, in front of his coworkers from the firm, in front of the people he'd spent years impressing. His image always mattered to him more than fairness ever did. Watching that image crack was the first payment I ever collected. If you've ever had to build yourself alone, I want you here. Like this, subscribe, and share your story so nobody gets told to manage in silence again. Our house stood on a quiet street, lined with trimmed hedges and mailboxes painted in soft colors. Every weekend, my father mowed the lawn in perfect stripes while neighbors waved from across the road. My mother would bring him lemonade, and people would comment on how lucky we were. In pictures, we looked exactly like what he wanted us to be, a postcard of stability. What the camera never caught was how much of that perfection was performance. Inside, the air was always measured. Voices were calm, even when emotions were not. My father worked in finance and believed that control was proof of success. He managed our home the same way he managed numbers. Everything had to balance, and feelings were just variables that ruined the equation. He called Valentina his little miracle, the reason he worked late nights. I was his strong one, the reminder that he didn't have to worry, compliments that built a wall instead of affection. Valentina glowed under attention. Her laughter filled rooms like sunlight, and every small achievement was displayed like a trophy. A perfect report card earned her a family dinner out. Mine, equally good, earned a quiet nod and a reminder not to brag. When she forgot chores, my mother covered for her with soft apologies. If I was late finishing mine, the silence in the room grew heavy until I learned to apologize first. Little imbalances, subtle weights that trained me to shrink politely. Birthdays were rehearsed joy. For Valentina's 10th, my father gave her a pink bicycle with a silver bow, the kind every suburban child dreamed of. A year later, he repainted that same bike blue and rolled it into my arms with a proud smile, as if he'd created something new. I smiled back, said thank you, and rode it until the paint peeled. Gratitude was safer than disappointment. Love in our house was currency. You didn't spend it carelessly. My mother, Rosa, floated between us like a peace treaty no one had signed. She avoided arguments by turning them into errands, baking, cleaning, folding laundry that didn't need folding. When she told me not to upset my father, her tone wasn't warning but pleading. I learned early that silence kept the lights on, that obedience was how you maintained peace. My father didn't yell, he didn't need to. His approval was a light switch on or off, and we all lived trying to stay in the brightness. Valentina learned that brightness belonged to her. She was the daughter he brought to company picnics, the one whose photograph sat on his desk beside financial reports. I was the one behind the camera, making sure the moment looked good enough to frame. At family dinners, he asked about her friends, her hobbies, her future. When it was my turn, he'd already checked his phone. I told myself it was fine, that I didn't need his attention to exist. But the truth is, every child measures themselves by the warmth of their father's gaze. Mine was cool, precise, and temporary. Still, I tried to earn it. I cleaned without being asked, studied until midnight, spoke softly so I wouldn't sound ungrateful. Each small effort felt like applying for a job I'd never get. Praise, when it came, was rationed. "That's good, Nina," he'd say, eyes already elsewhere. Even his pride was a form of control. It came when I succeeded quietly, never when I demanded space. The unspoken rule was clear. Valentina represented his achievements. I represented his discipline. Outsiders saw harmony. Inside, it was hierarchy. My father's voice decided which version of us was worth showing. Valentina learned to sparkle on command. My mother learned to smile through worry. I learned to disappear gracefully. That was our family system, a flawless balance built on one unacknowledged truth. Perfection had a favorite. By the time I reached high school, that favorite had her path mapped out. Tutors, clubs, summer programs all paid for, all carefully chosen to reflect well on him. I worked weekends at a local cafe, saving money for things I didn't even know I'd need yet. I didn't resent Valentina then. I told myself I was building character, that independence would mean freedom someday. Back then, I still believed freedom was something you had to earn permission for. Our family looked strong from the street, lights glowing through clean windows. But I knew better. Every evening, as my father parked his car in the driveway and stepped out in his pressed shirt, I could see it, the shadow of expectation wrapped around him like a second suit. It made him proud. It made me invisible. High school passed like a quiet storm. I kept my grades high, my voice low, and my expectations reasonable. My father liked things that stayed predictable. I learned how to make myself part of that pattern. Valentina had become the center of every family conversation, her laughter carrying through walls while mine stayed in notebooks and late-night study sessions. It didn't bother me at first. I thought keeping peace was its own form of love. When college applications began, it felt almost like teamwork. We sat at the same kitchen table, identical forms, identical dreams, both applying to the same university for accounting. My father looked proud, my mother hopeful. For the first time, I thought we might be equals. The night the acceptance letters arrived, the house buzzed with excitement. 2 envelopes, 2 futures sealed in matching colors. Valentina screamed when she read hers, and my mother hugged her so tightly that for a second, I believed we were the same in her arms. That illusion didn't survive the night. I had gone downstairs later for water when I heard voices from the living room. My father's tone was calm, the way it always was when he'd already made a decision. My mother sounded small. I stopped at the hallway corner, hidden behind the half wall, and listened. It wasn't curiosity, it was instinct, the kind you develop when love always sounds like strategy. "We'll pay Valentina's tuition completely," he said. The words landed with the weight of something rehearsed. "She needs the stability. Nina's clever, she'll figure it out." There was a pause long enough for the refrigerator hum to fill the room. My mother hesitated before answering. "Are you sure that's fair?" He exhaled, the sound sharp and final. "Valentina deserves it. Nina doesn't. She's independent. She'll manage." It's strange how a sentence can split your life into before and after. Those words didn't echo, they settled. They buried themselves under my ribs where I could feel them every time I tried to breathe. Deserve. The word burned hotter than any insult. It didn't say I lacked ability, it said I lacked worth. I remember standing there, one foot on the staircase, gripping the banister so tightly that my palm left a mark. My father's voice faded into the rhythm of my heartbeat. I waited for my mother to object, to say something, anything. But the silence stretched until it wasn't silence anymore. It was consent. I didn't cry. I didn't move for a long time. Eventually, I went upstairs and looked around my room as if seeing it for the first time. Every book, every medal, every neat corner suddenly looked ridiculous, like props in a play I hadn't realized I was performing. I wasn't the strong one. I was the unchosen one. That night I packed a box. Not because I was leaving yet, but because I needed to feel that leaving was possible. I folded my clothes carefully, stacked them like proof that I could take control of something. The house was silent, except for the soft tick of the clock in the hallway. Each second felt like an accusation. When morning came, Valentina bounced into the kitchen, full of excitement about her dorm colors and what she'd wear for orientation. My father beamed. My mother brewed coffee and pretended the air wasn't heavy. I ate my breakfast quietly, the way someone learns to when words can wound more than hunger. No one noticed that I had already decided to stop asking for help. I didn't confront them. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't sound like begging, and I refused to beg for fairness. I told myself independence was my revenge, that proving him wrong would be better than hearing him apologize. In that moment, I understood what strength really was. It wasn't resilience, it was restraint. The following weeks blurred into preparation. Valentina's new laptop arrived by mail, followed by boxes of bedding and decor. My father handled the payments, my mother wrote lists. I watched, invisible in the corner of my own family, while pretending I was fine. In truth, I was calculating, not out of bitterness, but survival. When August came, I loaded my car with thrift store essentials and scholarship paperwork. No one offered to help me carry anything. Valentina's move-in day was a family event: photos, lunch, laughter echoing down the dorm hallway. Mine was a solo trip, 2 hours later, in the same city but a different world. That night, in the small apartment I'd rented off campus, I sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes and silence. The sentence replayed again and again until it lost sound and became a pulse. She deserves it. Nina doesn't. It was no longer anger I felt. It was clarity. That night I decided, if my father believed I didn't deserve his support, I would build a life so solid that his belief would become irrelevant. I didn't need him to see me. I needed to make sure the world did. Morning light in the city never felt gentle. It pressed against the blinds like a reminder that rest was a luxury. My alarm went off before dawn, the sound cutting through the quiet of my rented apartment. I dressed in the dark, tied my hair, and walked to the bus stop carrying a thermos of coffee I couldn't afford to spill. The streets were mostly empty except for people like me, the invisible kind, up before the world needed us. My first job was at a small cleaning company that handled office buildings downtown. I scrubbed floors, wiped glass, emptied trash bins, and learned which elevators made the least noise when they opened. By 7:30, I would be done, and the city would already look new again. No one ever knew who cleaned it. I liked that kind of anonymity. It meant no one could take credit for my work but me. After classes, I worked as a tutor for freshmen struggling with accounting. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was teaching the subject my father had built his career on, though he'd never know. Between the two jobs, there wasn't much room for social life or sleep. Meals were whatever I could microwave in 5 minutes, and laundry happened when exhaustion loosened its grip long enough to move. Yet I found a rhythm in the repetition. Work didn't judge, it only asked for consistency. Valentina and I attended the same university, though our paths rarely crossed. She lived on campus, in a bright dorm paid for by my father. Her world was loud sorority mixers, weekend trips, and photos that captured perfect smiles. I saw glimpses of her life online, a highlight reel of ease. I didn't envy her. What I felt was quieter than envy. It was distance, the kind that expands without anyone noticing until you realize you're standing on opposite sides of a river. Occasionally, she'd text me something simple like, "You should come to this event," or "You look tired lately." I never answered with anger. Just a polite maybe, or "I've been busy." We had grown up in the same house but learned different languages. Hers was comfort, mine was survival. I learned to budget time like money. 10 minutes could be stretched into 15 if I skipped lunch. $1 could last 3 days if I walked instead of taking the bus. There was a satisfaction in independence, even when it hurt. Every tuition bill I paid felt like a receipt for freedom. It was during my second semester that I met Professor Blake. He was in his early 40s, precise but not cold, the kind of person who noticed effort before talent. I had submitted an essay analyzing corporate ethics, a topic I'd written from instinct more than knowledge. When he returned it, there was a note at the bottom: "You think like someone who's already lived through what she studies." It was the first time anyone in authority had seen me beyond grades. He asked me to assist him with a research project on financial transparency, a position that came with a small stipend. I said yes immediately, though I barely understood what the work required. My life became a loop of lectures, cleaning shifts, and data entry, but something inside me began to change. For the first time, my exhaustion meant progress. There were nights when the city lights blurred through my window, and I'd wonder if my father ever thought of me. Maybe he imagined I was struggling, waiting for him to offer help, but I didn't want his help. The more I built alone, the more I realized that survival wasn't my punishment, it was my transformation. I started earning recognition, a small scholarship, a professor's recommendation, a published research note, all proof that my effort wasn't invisible. Yet, every achievement brought a shadow of sadness. I wanted to share it with someone who would be proud, not surprised. My mother sent brief texts asking if I was eating well. I always said yes, even when I wasn't. By the end of my sophomore year, I had paid for every class and book myself. My account balance was often one bill away from empty, but I'd stopped measuring wealth in numbers. Independence had become its own currency. I didn't realize then that what I was building wasn't just a degree, it was a story, one my father would never be able to rewrite. There's a quiet kind of revenge in proving someone wrong without saying a word. Each day I woke before the sun, each exam I aced, each shift I finished with aching, hands it all accumulated into something stronger than resentment. It became proof of endurance. When people looked at me, they saw a tired college student. I saw a survivor learning how to build a future from scraps. Every dollar I earned wasn't just money, It was distance from the sentence that once defined me. By the time I reached my final year of college, exhaustion had stopped feeling temporary. It became a constant rhythm, like the low hum of fluorescent lights in the library where I spent most of my nights. I wasn't counting semesters anymore. I was counting paychecks, deadlines, and hours of sleep. Still, there was a quiet pride in how far I'd come without asking anyone for help. Professor Blake often reminded me that consistency mattered more than brilliance. He said it casually, as if it wasn't the lifeline that kept me from giving up. Working as his assistant had turned into something more than a job. It was proof that I belonged in spaces I was never invited into. My father's voice still echoed sometimes in the back of my head, telling me what I didn't deserve. But those echoes were softer now, buried beneath the sound of my own persistence. Then, one afternoon in late spring, it happened. I was sitting in the computer lab finishing a data report when my inbox pinged. The subject line read, "Invitation to apply, Ford and Levine National Scholarship Program." My first thought was that it was a mistake. Those emails were meant for students with connections, not the girl who cleaned offices at dawn. But as I scrolled, my name appeared in bold letters. Professor Blake had nominated me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room around me faded into background noise, the clacking of keyboards, the hum of air conditioning. My hands trembled as I reread every line, afraid the words would vanish if I blinked too hard. Preliminary nomination, academic excellence, exceptional perseverance. Each phrase felt foreign, as if describing someone I hadn't met yet. I thanked Professor Blake later that day, but words felt inadequate. He just smiled and said, "You've earned this, Nina. Now prove them right for seeing it." That sentence stayed with me, heavier than praise but warmer than hope. The scholarship process was brutal. Essays, recommendations, interviews, all while balancing my two jobs. I spent nights drafting statements that blurred between truth and survival. I wrote about ethics, determination, and the invisible people who keep systems running. In every paragraph, I slipped pieces of myself, the girl who learned that silence could build fortresses, the student who never expected applause. Weeks passed, then months. I told no one, not even Valentina. Experience had taught me that some victories lose their meaning when shared too early. My family believed I was still just a hardworking student trying to get by. Maybe it was easier that way. Then, one morning in February, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar notification. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another late payment reminder. But the sender's name stopped me, Ford and Levine Foundation. The message began simply, "Congratulations. You have been selected as one of 5 national recipients of the Ford and Levine Scholarship." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then I laughed, a sound sharp and shaky, more like disbelief than joy. I was alone in my tiny apartment, surrounded by unpaid bills and textbooks stacked like barricades, but it didn't matter. Someone out there, someone who didn't know my history, had decided I was worthy. The award covered my final year in full, plus a grant for future professional training. It wasn't just money, it was validation written in official language. Proof that effort could rewrite a family narrative. When I called my mother to tell her, she seemed distracted. She said, "That's wonderful, honey. Your sister just got invited to a mentor's event. You should be proud of each other." I said I was. And I meant it, even if part of me wanted more than acknowledgement. I wanted her to hear the difference between good and extraordinary. After the call, I printed the scholarship letter and pinned it above my desk. Not as decoration, but as a declaration. Every time I looked at it, I felt the quiet hum of all the nights I hadn't quit. The foundation announced a ceremony scheduled for early May. Recipients were invited to bring their families. I hesitated. The idea of standing on that stage, with my father in the audience, made my chest tighten. But something inside me whispered that this was the moment I had been building toward, the quiet confrontation he would never see coming. So I clicked, RSVP, confirmed. That night, I walked to the library rooftop, the one place on campus that felt like mine. The city lights below pulsed in steady rhythm, matching my heartbeat. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something I had to chase. It was standing still, waiting for me to step forward. I thought about that first job scrubbing office floors, about the mornings when the city shined because I'd made it clean. Now, I realized I'd been doing the same thing with my life all along, scrubbing away doubt, polishing every wound into something that could reflect light. And this time, the reflection finally belonged to me. The morning of the ceremony arrived clear and sharp, the kind of day that looked almost too perfect to be real. I woke before the alarm, the letter from the foundation still pinned above my desk. It had faded slightly at the corners, but the words were etched in my memory. I pressed my hand against the paper, feeling its weight like a promise I had made to myself years ago. The invitation said, "Formal attire." I borrowed a dress from a friend, a simple navy one that looked professional enough to hide its age. My shoes had small scuffs along the edges, but they were polished to a quiet shine. I didn't care about perfection anymore. I cared about presence. When I arrived at the Ford and Levine Foundation Hall, sunlight spilled across the marble floors, catching every glimmer of gold in the banners that hung above the stage. Rows of chairs stretched neatly beneath high ceilings. A large emblem displayed the foundation's motto, "Integrity deserves recognition." I stood for a moment, letting the words sink in. Integrity. That was all I'd ever had to offer. Families began to arrive, proud parents, siblings, mentors. Their laughter filled the space like music I wasn't sure I belonged to. I found my assigned seat among the recipients, a small card with my name written in careful script, Nina Alvarez. For years, that name had carried nothing but obligation. Today, it finally carried pride. Then I saw them. My father, my mother, and Valentina, stepping through the entrance as if they had wandered into a stranger's celebration. My mother's eyes darted across the room, her expression a mix of confusion and admiration. Valentina looked radiant, of course, in her tailored dress and easy smile. My father's posture was the same as always, composed, commanding. Yet something flickered in his gaze, a hesitation that hadn't existed before. They found seats near the front, unaware of what kind of ceremony this was. I hadn't told them. All I'd said was, "There's a small event at the university. You can come if you want." They had wanted to. Maybe curiosity had replaced pride. Maybe guilt had disguised itself as support. As the audience settled, the host walked to the podium. The microphone crackled, then steadied. "Today," she began, "we honor students who exemplify resilience, academic excellence, and character." Her voice carried across the hall, smooth and confident. My pulse matched her rhythm, fast but steady. Names were called one by one. Applause filled the space in soft waves. Then, I heard mine. "Our next recipient," she said, "is a student whose determination has redefined what it means to succeed without privilege. Working multiple jobs to support herself through college, she has demonstrated not only excellence but extraordinary integrity. Please welcome Nina Alvarez." For a second, I couldn't move. The words "without privilege" echoed through the hall, slicing cleanly through the illusion my parents had always maintained. My mother's smile froze mid-breath. Valentina's eyes widened, camera forgotten in her hand. My father's face went pale, the kind of pale that no expression could hide. I stood. My legs were steady, though my heartbeat was not. Each step toward the stage felt deliberate, a reclaiming of space I'd been denied. The applause swelled, genuine, generous. I caught sight of Professor Blake nodding from the second row, pride quiet and unspoken. When I reached the podium, the host handed me the plaque. Its weight surprised me. It wasn't heavy because of metal or glass. It was heavy because it represented every night I'd chosen to keep going. "Congratulations, Miss Alvarez," she said softly. I smiled, not for the cameras, not for the audience, but for the version of myself who had once believed she didn't deserve anything. From the stage, I could see everything. My father's tightly folded hands, my mother's trembling chin, Valentina's confusion that bordered on shame. The distance between us wasn't measured in feet anymore, it was measured in truth. The ceremony continued in a blur of applause and names, but I barely heard them. I sat with the plaque in my lap, tracing the engraved letters. I had never imagined what victory would feel like. It wasn't loud. It was calm, steady, like exhaling after years of holding your breath. Afterward, people came to congratulate me, professors, donors, even strangers who said my story inspired them. I smiled and thanked them, though part of me still floated above it all, detached and weightless. When the crowd began to thin, I saw my family waiting by the exit. My father stood slightly apart, his jaw set but his eyes uncertain. My mother held her purse close, as if clutching composure. Valentina looked down, her voice caught somewhere between apology and disbelief. I approached them, slow and measured. My father spoke first. "We didn't realize," he began, but the words trailed off. "I know," I said quietly. It was all I needed to say. Silence stretched between us, not hostile, but final. They didn't ask questions. I didn't offer answers. There are moments when explanation becomes unnecessary, when truth exists too clearly to be spoken. Before they could respond, a representative from Ford and Levine approached me. "Miss Alvarez," she said, Our recruiting team would like to speak with you about an internship opportunity, there by the window. I turned to my family one last time. Excuse me, I said, polite, composed. Then I walked away. The recruiter's table gleamed under the light, and as I shook their hands, I caught my reflection in the glass wall behind them. My family stood still, small against the brightness. For years, I had been the shadow beside their light. Now they were the ones learning to squint in mine. The applause faded long before the echoes left my mind. In the quiet days that followed, everything felt strangely still. The air itself seemed lighter, as if I had finally stepped out from under a ceiling I hadn't realized was pressing down on me. The plaque from the ceremony sat on my desk, its glass surface catching the morning light. It wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder that my story no longer belonged to anyone else. Within a week, I signed the internship offer from Ford and Levine. It was a position in their corporate ethics division, a place I never imagined I'd reach. The offer came with a relocation package and a promise of mentorship. I accepted without hesitation. Packing my few belongings took less than a day. I left behind the apartment, the city, and the version of myself that had spent too many nights counting coins and compromises. The new city felt foreign but forgiving. Skyscrapers replaced campus towers, and the rhythm of my life changed from survival to momentum. I woke early not because I had to, but because I wanted to. There was something liberating about walking into an office where no one knew my past. No whispers, no comparisons, no invisible ledger of debts I owed to someone else's comfort. Professor Blake sent a short note. I'm proud of you, Nina. Keep your integrity. It will take you further than ambition ever could. I kept that email pinned in my inbox like a compass. Months later, an article appeared in a local business journal highlighting Rising Voices in Corporate Responsibility. My name was there, along with a small photo from the ceremony. The journalist had written about students who overcame financial adversity to make systemic change. I didn't know it then, but the story spread further than I expected. That's how my family found me again. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with messages numbers I hadn't saved but recognized instantly. My mother's hesitant tone, Valentina's confused one, my father's brief and formal line. Each message carried the same thread. We're proud of you. We'd love to talk. For a long time, I stared at the screen without answering. Pride, I realized, was a fragile thing. It could arrive years too late and still expect to be welcomed. I didn't hate them. I just didn't owe them access to the person I had become. Silence, for me, had always been a language, and now it was the only answer that fit. Weeks passed, and the messages stopped. The distance solidified into peace. Valentina eventually posted about a new chapter of self-reflection, her words carefully polished for an audience that would never know the story behind them. My father retired from his firm soon after, his public image untarnished but quieter. My mother sent one final email with a line that lingered in me longer than I wanted. We didn't realize you were strong because we never saw you break. She was right. They had mistaken silence for weakness. But strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just endures until it no longer has to. I built a small life in that city routine. Steady, mine. I made friends who knew me for who I was, not who I had been compared to. I bought my own furniture, framed my degree, and planted a small fern on the windowsill. Watching it grow became a kind of ritual, an affirmation that life continues quietly when you give it the right light. Sometimes, in late evenings when the streets were hushed and the sky glowed with distant neon, I would think about the house I left behind, not with longing, but with understanding. Every person in that story had been trapped in their own reflection. My father in his pride, my mother in her silence, Valentina in her need to be adored, and me in the shadow of all of them, learning how to become whole. Now, I no longer lived in reaction to them. My life didn't orbit theirs anymore. It spun freely, steady in its own gravity. One afternoon, after a presentation, a colleague asked how I stayed so calm under pressure. I almost laughed. Calm wasn't a gift, it was the residue of surviving chaos. I told her, when you've already been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you, nothing else feels threatening. She smiled, thinking it was a metaphor, but I meant every word. Years later, I would be invited back to the same foundation's annual event, not as a recipient this time, but as a speaker. I stood on the same stage, beneath the same banner, and looked out at a room filled with new faces. I spoke about perseverance, about rebuilding a sense of worth from silence. I never mentioned my past, not directly. The people who needed to understand already did. When the event ended, a young woman approached me. Her hands trembled slightly as she said, "Hearing your story makes me think maybe I can make it too." I smiled at her and said, "You already have. You're here." And in her eyes, I saw the reflection of my own beginning. That night, as I walked home through the city's soft noise, I thought about the word revenge. It used to mean proving them wrong. Now it meant something gentler, proving to myself that their words had lost all power. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about victory over others. It was about liberation from the weight they left behind. My story didn't end with reconciliation, because not every wound requires healing through forgiveness. Some just need closure through growth. I didn't need my family's acceptance anymore. I had already accepted myself. The world was wide again, and this time, it was entirely mine.